Hi, Dr. Quinn here, your Chief Organizational Psychologist of iAsite, helping transform your work environments into high-performing environments marked by great communication and a joy for work. Today, in this video short, I want to highlight a few things that we probably know intuitively, but we don't really know practically or applicably how to apply some of these things. We're looking to perform at our best. We're looking to provide that excellent product or service. And how do we do that? Well, one of the ways we do that is we've got to kill chaos. What is chaos? Chaos is a lack of predictability in our work environments. It looks like not knowing what we're supposed to do for our work, not knowing how our performance is measured. It looks like a role that is constantly morphing with unclear expectations. And in order to perform at our best, we have to have something to aim at. If you've heard that saying, aim at nothing and hit nothing, or aim at everything and hit nothing, that's what this applies to. We have to understand what looks like excellent performance inside our organization, and specifically with our own particular role. Well, the traditional system of measuring performance is what we would call qualitative, meaning it's subjective. Subjectivity is this idea that we try to gauge something, we try to measure something, we try to evaluate or quantify something, and we basically go on emotion or we go on our memory. And science has shown that our memories, the way we encode memories, are not necessarily exactly accurate. And in fact, they can be terribly skewed. So environments marked by a lot of chaos, a lack of predictability and clarity, cause a lot of problems. And particularly one of the first things to do is to create great role definition. And by role definition, we mean, what does the role entail? What are the job tasks and duties specifically that are required for the role that have to be executed at a certain frequency? And how are those measured? So when you think about killing chaos inside your work environment, no matter what that work environment looks like, it means reducing the lack of predictability or the unexpected. When we know what's expected of us and we can predict how our leaders will respond, we know what's required in our job, what those tasks or duties are that we have to do on a regular basis, and how they're measured in an objective way versus a subjective way, it's a game changer. It gives us something to aim at. We know whether we're doing a good job or not. We break out of that do a good job mentality because we know exactly what doing a good job looks like. When it comes to designing roles and creating what we call clear role definition, the antithesis or opposite of clear roles involves a couple of categories. So one of those is role overload. This is where a role organically becomes too large for one individual to do. So they're stretched too thin. And we hear this term work-life balance. In the research, it's called work-non-work interface. So what happens holistically in a person's life when we have a team member that has role overload, there's just too much to get done in a day. There's no way they can possibly stay on top of things. That's role overload. The other thing we need to watch out for is role ambiguity. Role ambiguity is where a role is not clear. And this creates a lot of conflict in teams and a lot of frustration and stress. Because again, what one has to do is unpredictable. Does my team member do that task or do I do that task? Who's actually responsible for that task? And so it can create confusion. If you've ever been in a situation where you don't know exactly what the role is or what you're supposed to do when, this looks like the stress of coming into a meeting unprepared because we didn't know we were supposed to lead that meeting or be responsible for that particular task inside a project. That's role confusion or role ambiguity. And the last category, which is the opposite or the antithesis of being able to perform at a high level, is what we call role conflict. This is where a role is designed in such a way that the tasks of that role fight against each other. And that can also look like on a granular level, task conflict. Let's say I have to do some kind of complex analysis or reporting for my leaders, and at the same time, I'm expected to answer the phone and do customer service. Those don't go hand in hand. They conflict with each other. So any part of a role that creates a conflict in interest or a conflict in motivation, or it's just plain difficult to do those tasks together, is a good example of role conflict. So these three things will create this chaos that we're talking about. The next thing that we have to do when we're looking at performance is we've got to break away from the old subjective scales of meets expectations. Now, a Likert scale of 1 to 5 with, 5 stars on it is not necessarily a bad scale. The problem is those scales are typically based on subjective information. The most common thing I see on a performance review form is meets leaders' expectations. Well, what does that mean exactly? What are the behaviors that people can observe or my leaders can observe that can be counted that are quantifiable versus qualitative information or subjective information? What does that look like? What are the specific things that I do and how do I do them? And are my leaders able to observe those outcomes on a regular basis? Lastly, one thing that marks low-performing, chaotic, and stressful environments and steals the joy out of our work is infrequent feedback, and we call these feedback loops. So if I'm doing my job and I get one annual review, and in that review the bill comes due and I find out that, hey, I haven't been doing what my leader's been wanting, or it's been changing because the performance measures are subjective, it comes as a great shock and also a great letdown, a huge demotivator. How do we counteract this inside our organizations as teams and leaders? Well, the first thing we need to do is create a stable and predictive environment. And the way to do that is to create clear roles. So analyze roles to make sure that they encompass a certain scope inside the organization. Is that role efficient and functional? Meaning, does it hone in on that particular need or that particular responsibility for the organization, for our company? Does it actually do what it's supposed to do? Is it concise enough that it doesn't create overload? Are there any other roles that it interfaces with, and how do those roles make handoffs? Now, something that's powerful to do is what we call boundary spanning. And that is where roles interact or hand off a process of a product or service. Each person in that role knows a little bit of the handoff, meaning if I design part of a product, I know how to do the person's job next to me to some degree. I know how to get that product over. That allows me to be a good team member so that I can help when we've got too much work. I'm able to flex if I've got capacity and help my team member because I know some of their role. But on a day-to-day basis, I'm not responsible for that area. So there's clear role definition. There's clear boundaries between roles. Also, design roles that don't put a person in a position of conflict. So an example of this might be if part of my role is to, achieve X, this certain outcome, but part of my role is to achieve another outcome, let's say outcome B versus outcome A. If outcome B causes my motivation to conflict with the motivation of another outcome, it makes me fight against myself. And of course, two forces, moving, one forward and one back, we're going to get the difference of those two versus getting the full velocity forward. So we need to create roles that are moving in one particular direction, that are focused on outcomes that are congruent or cooperative with each other. Secondarily, the next thing to do, instead of having a rating scale that's like a 1 to 5 with a very vague or subjective, chaotic description like meets leaders' expectations, we need to define what those behaviors are specifically and actually be able to quantify or count those behaviors. I like to use the example if I had a dog walking business and one of the key performance indicators is exercise the dogs. Well, that doesn't tell me about how much or how specifically and what I need to do. And it doesn't give my leader the ability to say the dogs were exercised. And what I mean by that is at what level. So this is a quick example of how to create a great performance measure. So if it's my job to exercise the dogs, one thing we can do is determine, okay, how often do I walk the dogs? How far do I walk the dogs? For how long do I walk the dogs? And then we create some kind of log that I can either input into or the leader can observe my behaviors. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking, because this is a common question that comes up. I'd love to do that, but I don't have the time to observe every single one of my employees. Well, there's two things to do about that. One is, if your organization is large enough that you're, managing or leading a lot of people, what you need to do is empower other leaders under yourself so that there's the right team member to leader ratios. What that does is that gives them enough time to communicate and be attached to their leader and to get the attention and the affirmation, the encouragement, and the feedback they need. Secondarily, you can take what's called a stratified sample. And that means we don't sit with our team members every day as leaders. We take short observations over the performance review period. So let's say we do a semi-annual review, which, by the way, research shows that a single review per year is not effective and it can actually be more damaging. So let's say we do semi-annual reviews. As a leader, what I would do is take very brief moments, which are very doable, and I would observe those specific measures like exercising the dogs that are required throughout the review period. So I would take short observations that represent the review period. So let's say 6 months, I would be making sure that I took at least several measurements in month 1, month 2, month 3, and so on. Then I've got a sample set of observations that allows me to be objective and fair over the review cycle. That's what's called a stratified sample. Lastly, in addition to creating good role definition and clarity, creating actual objective, or what we call quantitative behavioral measures where we're observing behavior, it's something we can actually see, whether that's an output of a task done or it's something we can observe someone doing. We need to create frequent feedback. Here's what the research shows. Infrequent feedback, or not expressing to our team members how they're doing, both good work, good performance, high excellent performance, as well as what I like to call adjustment feedback. I'm not a fan of the term needs improvement. I think it's more of an identity label than it is viewing ourselves as dynamic people who can grow in skill set and we can grow in the excellence of our work or our performance. We need to give frequent feedback. What happens in a review is if someone hasn't had enough substantive feedback or objective feedback, they're not able to make corrections during the review cycle. So they live in a world of confusion, of not knowing how they're doing. When you give feedback, make it specific. So rather than saying you did a good job on that, point out specific things that the person did that were phenomenal or excellent. That lets them hone in their behavior on how they're doing things specifically to make improvements. If you walk away from this short video, the whole idea of this is to create clarity, something that's fair, and something that can actually be observed and counted, and to move away from the subjective, chaotic, and unpredictability in our work environments. That's what is the killer of the performance. It's the ability to not have clarity or have a lack of clarity. We want to move toward the ability to actually measure performance that's related strongly to the job, and to give frequent feedback along with clear role definitions. I hope this video helps you. We're passionate about what we do, increasing work happiness or job satisfaction, as well as high performance, which ultimately as leaders results in a great return on investment. We're cheering you on out there in the work world. Take care. We love to meet your needs. If you have any work-related questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to this post. We'd love to hear from you and interact with you.